When I go knit socks, people often ask me, how do you knit a sock? They look so complicated, but they're a really nice gift, or I'd like to be able to knit them for my family. But I get really overwhelmed when I look at a sock knitting pattern. So I'm going to tell you the first thing you need to do is throw out every pattern someone's given you. I'm going to show you a really easy method, it's like a methodology to knit a sock that doesn't involve technically a pattern. The first thing I'd recommend you do if you're going to start knitting socks, whether you're an experienced knitter or you're not, but you've never knit a sock before, is to use a double knit yarn or an Aran weight yarn and a 3.5mm needle, or a 3.25 if you're not a very tight knitter. So you need yarn and you need needles. Yarn, I'd recommend that you use a wool yarn, but it has say 25% nylon or 25% bio nylon, or it's something like a Jacobs, and then your heel will withstand heavy wear and tear. An acrylic yarn, it won't withstand heavy wear and tear, nor will a very delicate sock yarn like 100% merino. Needles can be quite complicated, and I tried a lot of different needles when I first started knitting socks. And the traditional needles for knitting socks are DPNs. When you buy DPNs, you'll get 5. Lots of older school knitters will actually knit socks on 4 DPNs instead. So you have your back stitches on 1 needle, your front stitches on 2 needles, and then you have an active needle where you knit round. I'd recommend trying DPNs. I was very afraid of them when I first started knitting, and for no reason at all when I actually learned how to use them. Loads of really good YouTube videos on how to cast on a DPN, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Your other option, which is quite popular, is 6-inch circulars. The problem with 6-inch circulars I've found is that when you cast on and then you need to join your knitting in the round, it can be really tight, and your first few rows of knitting can be really tight. They're good for things like sleeves. I wouldn't say they're necessarily great for socks, but I do know some sock knitters that absolutely love them. I don't use them because they're prone to giving me carpal tunnel, and that's really painful, and then I can't knit for about 3 weeks, which makes me upset. I'm going to put those over there. These are the Knit Pro ones. If you're going to start knitting, find the Knit Pro needles are brilliant. That's a Knit Pro needle, these are a Knit Pro needle. They do also do them in bamboo, but I find these stitches get stuck, so I don't like those. My favourite type of needles to knit socks on are the Addy Crazy Trio. So you get 3 needles, you essentially get 6 because there's 2 long needles on each size, and they're a combination between a 6-inch circular and a DPN. Absolutely brilliant, your stitches don't fall off, they move around seamlessly. There is a big price difference, so these are probably £5 a set. 6-inch circulars aren't much more expensive. These are probably 3 times more expensive. They're about £17–18 a set. But if you are going to start knitting socks, they make it quicker, smoother, and they won't give you carpal tunnel, and you don't have any problems with joining or your stitches slipping off your needles that much. So you've got your yarn, you've picked your needles. If you haven't used a DPN before, watch a very quick YouTube video on the basics of DPNs. I'll put a link below in the description. And then you need to cast on. The easiest way to cast on is Judy's Magic Toe Up Cast On. No other cast on beats it. In order to do that though, for your toe, you need one of these. There's a cardboard cutout of the foot you're going to knit to. I here have an 8-year-old's foot, my son who's 8, that's his foot. And it's so simple. You draw around the cardboard. So I think this was an Amazon box that I repurposed. And you make 2 lines on that cardboard. You do 1 line here at the top, which is the second toe in from the big toe. And your next line is where the ankle bone starts. And this is the most important line on your cardboard cutout, and date it because children grow. So when you do Judy's Magic Cast On, you are going to cast on until your stitches are as wide as that line here, that tiny little blue line. And that's as wide as you need to go for the toe. Once you've done that, come back and I'll talk you through the rest. So I'm going to presume here that you've cast on your toe. Your stitches are as wide as the blue line. Don't worry about the number, as long as you have an even number. We need an even number really. So if I was to do George's, I might do 8 on one side, 8 on the other. Or if it was to do a younger one, I might do 6 and 6. As long as they're an even number, we need an even number for the end of the foot when we come to the end of the leg. So what you need to do now is you need to increase your stitches in order to give you the boxy toe. So if I showed you a boxy toe, it would look like this. So you see, here's your Judy's magic. Well, this isn't actually Judy's cast on. This was a bit of an experiment and it's awful. But you need to create this. You need to create the triangular shape. And you do this by increasing 4 stitches per round every other row. And it's not 4 stitches on this side or 4 stitches on this side. It's 4 in total. So a round is both sides. So I don't use a stitch marker for my rounds. I just know wherever my tail is the start of a round. But if you do need to use a stitch marker, what you do is you put one, you just thread one in here. So you can get these stitch markers like this, or you can just use a piece of scrap yarn that you've tied a knot in and hook it in here. But there's the start of my round, which so I know in between these 2 needles, that is the start of my round. When you start increasing the stitches, you need your stitches to be equally divided onto your needles. So if you are using DPNs, you may have 6 stitches on the back, 3 on each there, and then you would knit with your 4th or 5th needle. On an Addy trio, you will just divide them equally between 2 needles. So you increase here, 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 and here, and then that's the end of your round. You can get fancy and start doing left leaning and right leaning decreases. When you start knitting the sock, I wouldn't worry about that so much because no one is going to notice whether it's a right or left leaning decrease or increase rather. I just focus on making sure your increases are in the right place. It doesn't really matter how you increase either. There's lots of different methods, whether you lift a stitch from the middle of the sock or you increase as if you were casting on, or you increase using the second stitch on the left hand side. I wouldn't worry about that. I would just make sure you are increasing in the right place. So you increase here, 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 and here. And you do that every second row. So 1 row of increases, you've done 4, 1 row of plain knitting, increase again. And you do that until you reach about here. So put the sock on the cardboard cutout, do your increases get a little bit further than that blue line, and once they do, you can stop increasing then. The increases actually don't take much time because they tend to be around about an inch long. So on a toddler sock, it's an inch long. On a child sock, it's probably 1.25 inches. A standard adult sock, maybe 1.5 inches, and that's quite generous. But then it has to just have a wider toe. It doesn't actually take that long. And you just do it until you reach a little bit further than the blue line. So I'd say before your second toe, you stop when you get to the start of your second toe in from your little toe. And that'll suffice because the rest will stretch to fit the foot. If you increase too wide, you'll find your sock is too baggy here on your instep. Once you've done that, you just knit. You knit simply until you reach this ankle bone line. You knit in the round, you can knit a pattern, you can knit cable, you can do 1 row in knit, 1 row in purl. I just like to tend to just knit normally until you reach this line here. When you reach that line here, the best heel you can do is a German short row heel. You can find those on YouTube, really straightforward, really quick. They take probably a fraction of the time that a standard heel looks like. If you see a video that says heel flap, don't click on it, that's the wrong heel. You need a German short row. This is a heel flap. And the reason why you don't want to do one of these is because they're really hard to get to fit your foot right. They are incredibly complicated to do, especially if you're a beginner knitter. You have to change your stitches halfway through. You end up with gaping holes here. You basically knit a flap in different stitches, then you have to go and pick up all these stitches on both sides and then hope it looks all right. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't fit, the instep's too narrow, and the pickup stitches are a bit messy because it's not a heel for the modern world. What you want your heel to look like, this is a very well-worn heel, but like this. So it's nice and rounded, the actual shape of a real heel, which is round, with a line down the middle. And knitted well, it's seamless. There's no picking up stitches, no adding stitches. It's just the way you twist, the way you do it is the way in which you twist your stitch on your needle when you knit. If you just put into YouTube, German short row, there are plenty of YouTube videos that will take you stitch by stitch all the way through it, and that's because it's so quick to do. Once you get used to it, a German short row heel can take about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. When you start, it might take you an hour. This would take you probably 3 evenings, in my case, of getting very frustrated. So frustrated, I never knitted this sock, the second sock. Once you've done your German short row heel, you don't add any stitches, you don't decrease any stitches, you've just done your heel. And then you just carry on knitting in the round, and you knit on the round to the point in which you want to start your ribbing. So depending on how long you want your sock, you knit, this is 4 inches for a toddler's chunky boot sock. Doesn't have to be that long if you want a shorter sock, it can be 2 inches. An adult sock tends to be about 6 inches. But then you do need to do some ribbing because that's what holds the sock onto your foot. I'd suggest for a toddler sock you do at least 1 inch. For an adult sock, at least 2 inches. This is a bit short. You can do a standard ribbing, knit, pearl, or you can do 2 by 2, knit 2, pearl 2. Or my actual favourite, which I don't have an example of here, is knit 1 into the back loop, pearl into the back loop, but also be a bit fiddly if you aren't familiar with knit pearl or getting a really good ribbing. Once you've done at least 1 inch of ribbing, you need to cast off. You need to cast off quite loosely. If you're a tight knitter, I'd recommend putting into YouTube stretchy bind off. That will allow the sock to go over the arch of your foot easily and up into your ankle, because otherwise you can have this problem where it's actually quite hard to get on because this becomes a really tight edge. See that edge not to be tight. This is quite tight. I wanted it tight so it doesn't fall off Henry's foot. This is a stretchy bind off. Doesn't really look much different, but it'll stretch nicely over the arch of his foot and up and then remain on. And that's my guide to knitting a sock. Without crying, without throwing it out the window, and without lots of bad words. Really simple, and as long as your cardboard cutout is right, your sock will fit every time. No more socks that are too long, too short, too wide, too baggy, with a heel that doesn't fit or you can't get on your foot. So I'll drop all this in a summary in the description. But yeah, let me know how you get on with your socks.